Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl, and we're continuing now on episode 4 of our Bretonnian faction focus, looking at the previous 6th edition, which was the last codex or army book that I should say that was released for the Bretonnians, seeing what units they had in their roster back then, how they played, which will give us an indication of what units and how they might play in Warhammer The Old World. I'd also give an introduction to anyone that never played Warhammer Fantasy Battle and has come across the Bretonnian faction in the Old World and are kind of wondering what it's all about and what they had and how they looked. This also ties in with the fact that Bretonnians had quite a big reveal recently at Warhammer Day, so that is tied into this, so we can look at potentially what is missing, what's been revealed, what hasn't been revealed, are there more units to come, and how does that impact the army as a whole. But now, as we move on to the first of the special units, which are the Questing Knights. So Questing Knights, they got good weapon skill and leadership, low toughness, wounds and initiative really though for heavy cavalry. Hand weapon, heavy armor, they come with a great weapon and shield. They come with a great weapon, so there is no lance formation here. Unit size is 5 to 12, and they can have full command characters. They have the usual purebred warhorse, but they do come with the questing vow now, which means they ignore panic caused by peasants, but they can also re-roll psychology tests, but they cannot use lances. So this is where the cavalry starts to get pricey. You're now at 280 points for 10. However, they do have the benefit of the extra strength through the great weapons, but this comes at a cost because great weapons strike last. So even if you charge, you're going to have to wait until you get attacked before you can attack back and gain that extra strength. The benefit, though, being that you get the extra strength, though, even if you stay in combat, you can continue having that extra strength, but you're always striking last. So, if you're attacking a weak unit, you're probably survivable enough that doesn't matter. But you want the extra strength to get through to high toughness, high armored models who are probably going to have pretty decent damage output. So attacking last, how many knights are you going to have left to attack back? That's the flip side to that. So I think most of the time their inclusion in the army was very dependent upon the style of the list. Were you going for like an all-knight list? A small unit could be useful if you had the points to spare. I think the downside for me, while they look pretty cool, and you can see the picture on the right-hand side there, they do look good, is that always striking last on a cavalry unit that needs that's getting the charge in, you see, and whether they're able to survive long enough. Like I say, it's a real flip side. You want the strength to go after these tougher units who can attack you back pretty hard normally. And so, are you going to have enough left to actually do the damage? And that is always the problem with the Questing Knights and, given their points cost as well. What we do know there's been no mention of Questing Knights so far from Games Workshop in that regard, and there's certainly no new model releases for Questing Knights. They have said there are still obviously units to come, particularly units that from previous, so these aren't new, but they are utilising the old models. I could quite well see, I can't see how you could have a Bretonnian list without Questing Knights. It's key to the lore. It's how you go from being a Knight of the Realm to a Grail Knight. You have to go on your quest and you become a Questing Knight. So, they're a key part of an army. They're going to have to appear. And at the moment, given there's been no other reveals and nothing else said about them, I think we're going to see potentially these models that you see in the picture here, the older version of the models of the Questing Knights, which were, I think they did turn them into fine cast before they were removed from sale when Warhammer Fantasy Battle finished. So that is potentially what you're going to see here. But that's the Questing Knights. Next up are the Pegasus Knights. So stats-wise, good weapon skill, toughness, wounds, and leadership. Low weapon skill, ballistic skill, and wounds for elite cavalry, though. So, it's kind of a bit of a flip side there. The wounds are good for a special unit, but for elite cavalry, it's looking a bit ropey. Equipment-wise, hand weapon, lance, heavy armor, and shield. Unit size now is 3 to 10, and they do get a full command. They do come with a knight's vow and flying cavalry, so they're basically flying knights of the realm. I would always include a unit of these guys, at least a unit of 6, typically led by a Lord on Pegasus. It's a highly mobile hammer unit. So, if you think your men-at-arms were causing that speed bump, these are the guys that can fly over quickly, get the charge in and do some real damage onto a flank or into the rear of a unit. And they can then move around the battlefield pretty rapidly afterwards to go where they're most needed. They do have a low model count, and their reliance on armor save means that they must be played carefully. They're vulnerable to missile fire, and they're particularly vulnerable to spells, particularly ones that don't allow an armor save, so you do have to think about that. And they are not cheap. 10 of these is 550 points. That's huge. So you can see why we'd be down at a unit of 6 plus the Lord. In terms of what we know from Warhammer The Old World, well, they've shown a picture of these guys. It will be the old models that you see here. They were in plastic because essentially they're basically Knights of the Realm on the Pegasus there. So that's what we've got. So we know you're going to get a unit of Pegasus Knights. They are in the new army roster, and it will be the old plastic models. No bad thing. They're not bad models overall, though they show their age when you compare them against the new stuff that we've seen, like the Unicorn and the Lord's Pegasus. But certainly in terms of size, that Lord's Pegasus looks like twice or 3 times bigger than these guys. So that will be interesting to see how they're going to manage some of the scaling across the units. It's supposed to be a Pegasus, but one's giant and one's tiny. But there you go. That's the Pegasus Knights. Incredibly useful unit, and I expect them to be the same. Anytime you've got a highly mobile, heavy cavalry unit, which is basically what Bretonnians are in terms of their knights, it has huge value for getting in those flank charges, even threatening war machines as well, being able to fly over enemy formations, threaten those war machines, which could be the bane of your knights, or hit weak archer units, and those archer units often containing a caster and putting those under threat as well. So it's got huge amounts of flexibility and a great unit, and pretty much always had at least one unit of Pegasus Knights in an army list back in the 8th edition. Next up, we have an interesting unit here. Now, this is the Grail Reliquary with Battle Pilgrims. So essentially, you've got like this Grail Knight. He's dead. There's a skeleton there on this kind of like throne that's carried by these worshipping sort of Battle Pilgrims. Above average wounds, attacks, leadership, because it's counted as one model. They do have a low weapon skill, ballistic skill, toughness, and initiative. Equipment for the Pilgrims there is a hand weapon, a shield, and light armor. Unit size, so it's a unit of 1, which is what you see here, which is 6 Battle Pilgrims and then the Reliquary in the middle. But you could add an additional 24 Battle Pilgrims, so that could become a unit of 30 Battle Pilgrims plus the Reliquary in the middle. It can only be included if you have another unit with the Grail Vow. So either you have your Lord with the Grail Vow, or you have Grail Knights, or as long as there is another unit in your roster with the Grail Vow, you can take this unit. They have the Peasant's Duty, they have Hatred and Stubborn, and then the Grail Reliquary itself, 5+ armor save, 4+ armor save in melee, center of the front rank, so that's where the Reliquary is always at the center of the front rank, and it does count as a standard bearer and a musician. And the Blessing of the Lady that we talked about in the first episode, where you pray at the beginning, does affect the entire unit, which is interesting because it only affects people with the knightly vows, so the questing vow, the Grail vow, or the knight vow. But this, the blessing, because it's the Grail Reliquary, does affect all those Battle Pilgrims as well. So just as a reminder, that's a 6+ ward save and a 5++ ward save, or 5+ ward save, I should say, against strength 5 attacks and higher. So a 30-man unit, could be quite interesting with that ward save. It's cool in concept, but you just didn't really see it that often on the table. I have to say, in 8th edition, it does lack the mobility. and it does lack the staying power. It's not very heavily armored. So even with the shield and the light armor and the 6+ ward save, it does go down pretty quick. There's virtually no output from the Battle Pilgrim's weapon skill 2, strength 3, versus its points cost, right? Which in most cases you were better place putting those points in Knights and Pegasus Knights to give you hard hitting mobility. So when we're looking at 8th edition, I just didn't see many of these out there. It's cool in its concept and cool looking, but they're just better options for the points during that period of time. But still quite interesting, and it'll be interesting. There's been again no mention of Grail Reliquate in from what we've seen in the reveals so far for Bretonnians in the Old World. But again, this is another unit that I could see coming back. I think overall this is a unit that deserves almost some kind of big model treatment. You think of something like Triumph of St. Catherine for the Sisters of Battle or something like that. You could turn this into something really cool. I think that's a long way off personally. There's been no mention of it so far, so there's still a chance. We're talking about early next year for release. Still a chance we'll see something, and there'll definitely be news ramping up as we get towards the end of the year. But with nothing seen so far, personally, I think if the Grail Reliquate is in the army roster, and I think there's a good chance it will be the old model that you see here in the picture. And lastly, for the special units, is the Mounted Yeoman. Now, normally I do special units in 2 parts because there are normally at least 8 units in the special category for an army roster. The Bretonnians have 4. Right, so we are massively down across the board in terms of our options. 2 Lords, 2 Heroes, 4 Core, 4 Special. This is a small roster, ladies and gentlemen. That is a huge issue for the Bretonnians, and there was no real reason for it. There were lots of different things they could have done. And we are seeing that expand with Knights of the Realm on foot, as an example. So in terms of Mounted Yeomen then, they do look quite different, as you can see in the picture here. They've got above average movement, low strength, toughness, attacks, and initiative, though. They come with a hand weapon, a spear, and a bow now, and they do have the option to take shields and light armor. But if they do take light armor, they do lose the fast cavalry rule, and that does cost extra points. Unit size is 5+, and they can have full command. So special rules. So they are peasants. They are peasants on horses. So they do have peasants' duty, and they do have the fast cavalry rule. So at 15 points per model, they're not bad for skirmish cavalry. They've got obviously they're good for movement disruption. Getting in the way of things, slowing things down, blocking a charge. They can threaten war machines or archer units with the bows, though 5 bows aren't really going to do a huge amount of damage, but against a war machine, you got a chance of picking off some crew. So they can impact the battle without being in melee. The survivability is overall pretty weak. You're not going to lose the fast cavalry bonus, as why take them? If you're going to put light armor on them, you might as well just take Knights Errant for only a few points more. So you're taking them really for that fast cavalry and for the bow. So it's not uncommon to see a small unit of these. I would generally see them as more something for unit blocking somebody trying to charge you in the flank, or to threaten those war machines. But I wouldn't say they're the most common. They're not like an auto-include unit. They're not a unit you saw in every single army list. And again, it was more if you kind of had the points to spare. And you wanted sort of a very specific role to be filled. These guys could potentially do that. But again, we've not seen anything mentioned about Mounted Yeomen in Warhammer The Old World. Again, they are a key part of the sort of the theme and lore of Bretonnian Army. So you kind of would expect to see them. It's quite possible we might see some new models for them. But given we've heard nothing, it's only a couple of months to go before we get into the new year. Early new year is release, as I've said just now. So if we are going to see Mounted Yeomen, I think at this stage it's probably going to be the old kit that you see here, which is a bit of a shame because while the men-at-arms I think look really cool, I think the Mounted Yeomen do look a little bit tired, and maybe some men-at-arms bits could spruce them up a little bit. But I think this is definitely a kit that I would like to see done in the future. And that brings us to the end of the Bretonnian special units. As I said, there's only 4. It's pretty light touch. In terms of that special category, Pegasus Knights, and we've seen, they're hugely expensive, but they're hugely valuable. Questing Knights can add value. The last two, the Grail Reliquae, I think it's a very special pick, as is the Mounted Yeoman. So, a 10-man unit of Pegasus Knights, 550 points, that's over 25% of a 2,000-point army list. So, you'll go through special points pretty quickly with them. For me, I'd be more likely to take Questing Knights and the Pegasus Knights over and above the Grail Reliquae or the Mounted Yeoman. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Let me know why in the comments down below. And as always, please hit that subscribe button. Totally free for you to do. Means a lot for me, so thank you for that in advance. And also, for this particular series, following some feedback on YouTube-specific content, so stuff that isn't live streamed, that the camera being on was distracting and took up too much of the screen. So please let me know your feedback. Do you prefer the camera on? Do you prefer it off? We've turned it off for this as a trial, and also then we can see more or bigger pictures of the miniatures. So please give me that feedback. I want to improve the content, but I can only improve it with your feedback. You're the guys that watch it. So thank you for that as well. You've been watching The Ghost Hour. Tune back in as we move to the Bretonnian Rare category.